It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Lara Tseng. Lara is an avid 13-year-old birder from Orange County. She is passionate about birds and science, and we'll hear more about that shortly. And she hopes to become an ornithologist in the future. She has volunteered with numerous organizations, including the Cavity Conservation Initiative, Tree Care for Birds and Other Wildlife, Sea and Sage Audubon, and Laguna Coast Wilderness Park, among many others. She is also a Bluebird nest monitor and a student advisor for the Western Field Ornithologists. And she's written articles for several ornithological journals and newsletters. Lara has also attended a lot of our talks and workshops, as well as events hosted by other birding and conservation organizations all over the country. And she is always an active participant and asks really great questions. So I am so thrilled that she will be the one sharing her work and experiences with us today, especially since today is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So Lara, thank you so much for joining us, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll share my screen. Thank you to SFBBO for giving me this opportunity and all of you for attending my talk. Today, I'll be talking about my passion for birds, science, and conservation, and my project on calcium consumption that involves nest boxes and Western bluebirds. From a young age, I had a deep interest in nature and wildlife. The mourning dove was my spark bird. Every morning, I woke to its soft cooing. I saw it often, and it was easy to approach. This made me interested in other birds as well. I started attending Sea and Sage Audubon bird camps, which furthered my interest in birds. One of the reasons I enjoy watching birds is that they are all around me. I can go just about anywhere with my binoculars and camera and be able to watch and photograph birds. Birds spark a lot of questions with their interesting behaviors and adaptations. For example, I might ask, why is this hummingbird using spider silk in its nest? This gives me a chance to try to find an answer to my question, or find out that a certain question doesn't have an answer. Continuing with this example, I might find out that hummingbirds use spider silk in their nests to bind all the materials together and also allow the nest to stretch and accommodate growing nestlings. One of the reasons bird conservation is important to me is that birds play an essential role in ecosystems. For example, woodpeckers are vital to the population of secondary cavity nesters, since other birds will use woodpecker cavities in dead trees after they are abandoned. Birds need greater protection and more advocates. Human development and many human activities harm birds and put them at greater risk. Two obvious examples of this are when dogs, humans, and their vehicles trample over or disturb snowy plover eggs on a beach, and how outdoor cats have become the second biggest killer of birds. As I've grown and dived deeper into my interest for birds, I have had many mentors who have given me much guidance, help, and support. I have had the opportunity to write articles for the Western Field Ornithologists Newsletter, the North American Bluebird Society's Bluebird Journal, and the California Bluebird Recovery Program's Bluebirds Fly newsletter. Other opportunities include making a presentation to the Southern California Bluebird Club, the City Council of Mission Viejo, the Environment for the Americas Migratory Bird Festival, Los Angeles Birders students, and Western Field Ornithologist students. During the summer, I was the Sea and Sage Audubon Virtual Coastal Bird Camp intern. All of these experiences have allowed me to share my interest in birds with others. Right now, I'm a Western Field Ornithologist student advisor and the Los Angeles Birders student newsletter editor. I'm also a Bluebird nest box monitor, which has given me the opportunity to create my Western Bluebird eggshell consumption project. In the next few slides, I will give an introduction to Western Bluebirds and nest box monitoring, and then go into my research on bluebirds. I'll start off by going over some bluebird ID and basics, with a focus on the Western bluebird. There are 3 species of bluebirds: Eastern bluebird, Western bluebird, and mountain bluebird. All bluebirds are thrushes. Like other thrushes, such as the American robin, bluebirds feed on the ground in search of insects. Until recently, it never dawned on me that these birds' profiles are so similar. If you ignore the colors, you'll notice that they are all sturdy birds with big chests that hop on the ground. Both mountain and eastern bluebirds have white undertail coverts, whereas the western bluebird has grayish undertail coverts. Eastern bluebirds have an orange collar, which the other 2 bluebirds don't have. Mountain bluebirds also have a thinner bill and longer wings, since they are the most migratory of the 3 species. Western bluebirds are found in open woodlands and grasslands with snags. They are also found in parks, golf courses, backyards, and other areas with grass. During the breeding season, bluebirds mainly forage for insects. In winter, they will eat small fruit and some seeds. Mistletoe berries are especially important to bluebirds during the winter. Bluebirds will flycatch, fly down from a perch and capture insects from the ground, and occasionally hover glean insects or berries from trees. They will also hop after their prey and obtain food from the ground. Western bluebirds are the least migratory of all 3 species. Some bluebirds will stay on or very close to breeding grounds. Others may migrate short distances. When they do migrate, they commonly move to different altitudes rather than latitudes. They are mostly diurnal migrants, with some nocturnal migration, and will migrate in loose flocks. Now I'll briefly go over bluebird monitoring. Western bluebirds are one of about 80 cavity nesting birds in North America. These cavity nesters consist of 22 woodpeckers, 10 owls, 1 falcon, 7 ducks, and 40 songbirds. Not all cavity nesting birds are obligate cavity nesters. This means that some birds can nest in places other than cavities. House terns are an example of a cavity nester that nests in many types of locations other than cavities. This may be one of the reasons why they are the most abundant cavity nester in North America. Woodpeckers, however, are critical to the survival of secondary cavity nesting bird populations that rely on their abandoned nest cavities. The regular removal of dead trees results in not only the loss of nesting cavities for cavity nesting birds, but the loss of all the habitat and ecological benefits that dead trees provide to natural and urban forests. Snags are important components of sustainable forests. Cavities come in many forms. Natural cavities come from tree decay. Secondary cavity nesters will use abandoned woodpecker-made holes. You can even see a bluebird nestling inside this one. Birds can also nest in broken treetops and behind loose bark. Stress cracks in live trees can cause decay and can be used to nest in if large enough. These cracks may also give woodpeckers a place to create a cavity that secondary cavity nesters will use later on. My mentor, Miss Martin, who educates everyone about the importance of dead trees, often tells tree care providers that stress cracks are not defects, but instead habitat features. Note the male white-breasted nuthatch, a cavity nester on this stress crack. There are many benefits to nest boxes. They can be alternative nesting sites for obligate cavity nesters and support species in decline. I would like to note, however, that not all cavity nesting birds will accept nest boxes. Monitoring also collects data and creates opportunities for scientific studies. It can engage people in conservation. This chart here shows the conservation concern score of the Western Bluebird. 6 biological factors are used to determine conservation concern scores for birds as they face climate change. These are population size, breeding distribution, non-breeding distribution, threats to breeding, threats to non-breeding, and population trend. You can see that the Western Bluebird has a pretty low score compared to the other birds. According to estimates by the Southern California Bluebird Club, 350,000 bluebirds have fledged through the California Bluebird Recovery Program since its founding in 1995. Nest boxes have been instrumental in stabilizing bluebird populations across North America. This is a great example of citizen science at work. The unintended outcome of this success, however, is that bluebird populations are now highly dependent on artificial cavities. And this effort is facing new challenges as nest box monitors retire and replacement monitors cannot be found. I would like to note that a nest box is a poor substitute for a dead tree. As I mentioned before, dead trees have many benefits to birds and other wildlife that cannot be replaced by a nest box. Grassy fields, golf courses, turf parks, and cemeteries are often ideal habitats for bluebirds in urban areas. I will briefly go into the reproductive stages of the Western Bluebird since I will mention them quite a bit when I go into my research. Bluebirds generally start nesting in March and end by June, although there is variation and some can start as early as February and end as late as August. Nest building occurs during days 1 to 6. 4 to 5 eggs are frequently laid, but the variation is 2 to 8 eggs. The female will sit on the eggs and incubate them. The nestlings hatch 12 to 17 days after the last egg is laid. This first picture here shows young nestlings, and the second shows near fledglings. Nestlings will fledge 18 to 25 days after the last egg is laid. The information I have gone over so far has hopefully given you an understanding of bluebirds and nest box monitoring. Now, I will begin sharing my project on the timing of eggshell consumption in different reproductive stages and broods of the Western Bluebird, Sialia mexicana. Before I start, I would like to thank the Southern California Bluebird Club for providing me funding to cover project costs and providing me volunteers to collect data. Calcium is a vital micronutrient for reproductive success. Calcium supplementation can increase eggshell thickness and egg volume, as well as make for an earlier start of breeding. Insufficient calcium can cause eggshell abnormalities, smaller clutch sizes, and make for a later start of breeding. External sources of calcium are important to birds, especially songbirds, which don't store calcium in their medullary bones, pointed out by this arrow here. Additionally, insects only provide 5 to 10% of the calcium needed for egg laying, meaning that birds have to find the majority of the calcium they need from other sources. Calcium is not only important to adult birds, it is also essential for nestlings' skeletal growth. Calcium comes from many sources. Some of these might be calcium-rich soil, snail shells, animal bones, and even a bird's own eggshells. There are two main questions I wanted to answer with this project. The first was, in which reproductive stage will there be greatest consumption? And the second, In which brood will there be greater consumption? I hypothesized that the greatest consumption that would be seen in nest building and egg laying, and that greater consumption will be seen during the first brood. My 12 volunteers and I monitored 64 nest boxes in Orange County. We perform weekly checks from March to August, which is the bluebird's breeding season. We measured out the amount of consumption out of 5 grams and refilled the container to 5 grams if any was consumed. We also checked inside the box for reproductive stage. The eggshells were provided to the birds in a small container. These white eggshells were sterilized and crushed into small pieces. I was assisted in statistical analyses by Ashley Peterson. I will not be going over the analyses in detail, because that could be a talk of its own and would need to be given by Ashley herself. However, the numbers extracted from these tests were critical to reaching and supporting the conclusions I drew. The statistical analyses indicates that there's high individual variation between nests and that there's correlation between consumption and reproductive stages. However, it shows that there's little difference between broods. I'll start off by explaining what this graph is about. On the x-axis is the reproductive stages, grouped into nest building, egg laying, and incubation. On the y-axis is the eggshell consumption in grams. There are 2 bars for each stage, one for the first brood and one for the second. This large colored dot here shows the mean, and the 2 lines above and below represent standard deviation. These little dots scattered about the graph are the raw data of how much each nest consumed. The statistical analyses and this graph shows that there was high individual variation in the consumption of eggshells. Some nests consumed little to none. Most consumed some eggshells, and few ate almost all of the 5 grams. Again, on the x-axis here are the 3 group stages. The y-axis shows eggshell consumption in grams. Like the other graph, there are 2 bars that represent the 2 broods. The large colored bars represent average consumption. The lines here represent error bars. The statistical analyses showed that there was significant difference in consumption between stages. The greatest consumption was seen in nest building, egg laying, and incubation. The statistical analyses showed that the brood number had little to no effect on consumption. Consumption seen in nest building, egg laying, and incubation was likely in preparation and for replenishment from egg laying. The high variation in average consumption of eggshells between nests suggests that bluebirds may have different strategies for obtaining calcium. I came to this conclusion because birds need sufficient calcium for egg laying, whether they get it from the supplemented eggshells or another source. Different sources could be more energetically costly to process, find, and obtain. This could affect reproductive success. Many questions came up as I was doing this project. Here are some of the questions. Do Western Bluebird parents feed their own eggshells to their nestlings? Do males eat eggshells for bone maintenance and other essential bodily functions? Are there sources of calcium other than eggshells that are more beneficial to reproductive success? Do females who lay a second set of eggs consume more eggshells in nestling and fledgling stages of the first brood? I did not run across comparable studies for eastern and mountain bluebirds, but there is research showing that female eastern bluebirds will eat their own eggshells. These are my references. I recently submitted a manuscript on my research. This experience taught me a lot about scientific writing and the importance of reading other papers on the subject. I got to collaborate and learn from many others during this process. There are many reasons why science excites me. It has also taught me many lessons. Science gives me the opportunity to ask questions, especially ones that have not yet been answered. When seeking answers, I have learned that I need to build upon the findings of others. This requires collaborating with people who have different expertise, skills, and ideas. I have discovered that questions are not always easy to investigate, and answers can take a long time to find. Sometimes questions are impossible to answer. The most important thing that science has given me is a scientific mindset. Adopting a scientific mindset helps me reason logically and objectively. These discoveries and new skills have helped me deal with other challenges in life. Thank you to the photographers who allowed me to use their pictures in my presentation. Thank you to the Southern California Bluebird Club for funding and the 12 volunteers that collected data for my project. Thank you to the mentors and inspirations for guiding and supporting me. To me, this Dunlin looks thoughtful, introspective, and wise, all traits that I strive for as I continue pursuing my interest in science and birds. Someday, I hope to get a chance to study my favorite bird, the Dunlin, and unravel the mysteries of the systematics of the 10 subspecies of Dunlins. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. I would be happy to hear any questions or comments you might have.
Lara, thank you so much. That was wonderful. It was really great to hear about all the experiences that you had that led you to do this research and the whole process of doing it as well, and the things that you really enjoy about science and birds. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. And I just want to say that you are so impressive doing this at such a young age. I don't think most people really learn about the research process until much later. You know, like for me, it was pretty much college, I would say. So you're getting a huge head start. So that's really exciting. So first, we had a couple of questions about, we had one about migration. Yeah, Marie asked, what dictates whether or not a species will be more or less migratory? Because you were talking about how mountain bluebirds were more migratory. And I do want to say that Mike did chime in. Mike is a local bluebird expert himself. And he said that migration of the birds depends on the advantage a bird would have through migration. If a bird can get all they need in one place, they would have no need to spend the energy to migrate. So food for raising young and food during harsh winters may be found in different places. So Lara, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was a great answer. And like, for example, mountain bluebirds, they'll go to the mountains to breed, and then they'll migrate because in the winter there's not much food there. But Western bluebirds, especially here like in Southern California, there's bugs around all year round, there's berries and plenty of food, so they don't really have any reason to use all that energy and fly to different places.
Great, thanks. And then Elena asked, are Western bluebirds affected by brown-headed cowbirds with their nests?
That's a really interesting question. In Western birds, I did read one report of cowbirds parasitizing on Western bluebirds, but I don't think it's very common that brown-headed cowbirds will lay eggs in cavity nesters, and it isn't very common in Western bluebirds.
Okay, great. Yeah, and Erin also chimed in that they have some examples of that happening at, it looks like Santa Barbara County Museum. So yeah, there is some evidence, but yeah, it's good to know. And Pamela asked, do bluebirds prefer nest cavities at a particular height? And I can also chime in that Mike said that bluebirds seem happy with nests 5 feet or higher off the ground. It's best to go higher to avoid predation if possible. And he uses hanging nest boxes throughout California, which can be as high as 17 feet off the ground. Do you have anything else you want to add to that, Lara?
I think that's a great answer and a good question. Yeah, it's best to keep them up higher so that both people won't get a chance to disturb them and predators won't either.
Great. And Jan asked, is eggshell eating known in many bird species, or is it specifically known with bluebirds or thrushes?
Well, there are many, well, not many, but there are cases of many birds taking eggshells out of the nest, and there's some cases of birds eating their own eggshells, but usually they don't really get a chance to eat like chicken eggshells like I provided to them, although there are studies that use eggshells, for example, on great tits, and they ate those eggshells.
Oh, very interesting. And Kate wanted to know, what brought you to your interest in dunlins?
Oh, well, I've always had interests in a variety of birds, but once I really got to know the dunlin, at first it's a really plain species, especially when you see them here in Southern California. They're brown, they're kind of small, and you don't notice them. But once you really start learning about them, they're a fascinating species. There's 10 subspecies, and they're all across in Asia and Europe and in North America too. So there's a lot of variation between them. For example, with their molt plumages, like their molt patterns, 3 of the subspecies will molt at different times than the other 7 subspecies. So some of them will molt before they head to their breeding grounds and migrate, and others will molt after doing so.
Wow, very cool. Yeah, I would say that dunlin is probably an underrated species. You don't really hear that as someone's favorite bird very often.
Yeah, and here's a dunlin, a downy young dunlin as my background.
So cute. Let's see, the next question I'm seeing is from Roshan, who asked, where can we get the manuscript?
Well, the manuscript, I submitted it. It's not yet published, but I'd be happy to share it once it is published, which is hopefully soon.
Great, yeah, I would be happy to share that with everybody who registered, so once it comes out. And then Robin asked, I am wondering if eggshell consumption was related to clutch size. So does more eggs correlate with more calcium consumption?
Well, when I was writing up my manuscript, I couldn't find any cases of eating more eggshells or eating more other sources of calcium. For example, oyster shells is another common way calcium is provided to the birds. I found no studies saying that the amount of eggshells they ate correlated to their clutch size, like benefiting their clutch size. However, I did see studies showing that if they didn't have enough calcium, they had a smaller clutch size.
Cool. And then I guess related to calcium, someone asked, will bluebirds accept oyster shells for their calcium needs?
I'm pretty sure they will. A lot of studies actually use oyster shells because you can buy them online and you don't have to go through the whole process of sterilizing and baking and all that with the eggshells. So I would think that they would take oyster shells.
Cool. And then Yoni asked, do you know why bluebirds lay blue eggs?
I'm honestly not really sure because, well, with robins, they lay blue eggs because that chemical helps protect them from UV somehow. But with bluebirds, they're in a cavity, so I'm not really sure. If anyone in the audience does know, please chime in.
Yeah, I'll see if any answers come up. But the next question is from Debbie, who asks, do bluebirds use the nest boxes when it's not the breeding season? And I think Mike also chimed in here. He said that cavity nesting birds often use nest boxes in the off season for roosting, especially on cold nights. Barn owls and certain larger cavity nesters may be in the boxes much of the year, but bluebirds and others spend their time outside the boxes. Anything else you want to add to that, Lara?
Well, the bluebirds, I know they're roosting probably because even after I clean it out, I see their poop in there. And for one of my boxes, I've even seen signs of woodpecker pecking at it. And I was checking on it during the winter, so I knew it wasn't something for nesting. So it was probably roosting in there as well.
Great. And let me see if there are any other questions that came in. We have lots of wonderful comments, which I will send to you. Danette asked, do grubs also supply calcium?
Well, it kind of depends. For example, mealworms, they're suggested people are suggested not to give large quantities of them because they are calcium depleting, especially since the nestlings, they're growing their skeletons and they really do need that calcium. But some insects will provide 5 to 10% of the calcium needed for egg laying, so they must be getting some calcium, the nestlings, from eating insects as well.
Marie asked, if a bird were to get too much calcium, is there a chance that their eggs will be too thick for the chicks to escape? Or how?
That's a good question, Marie. Marie's my best friend who's very supportive, so thank you, Marie. I don't think that's really possible because birds know how much calcium they need and they will kind of regulate the amount they eat. They won't eat too much. So songbirds, like they don't want to be too heavy so they can't fly. So they'll eat right before egg laying and they should get enough calcium. The problem usually is not getting enough calcium because it's not available in their environment. For example, areas that are acidic, that have become acidic due to agriculture and other things over the past years, and heavy metals too. I've seen studies showing that the birds there are having poor reproductive success because they just can't find the calcium they need, or after ingesting those heavy metals, they aren't able to process the calcium they eat.
Okay. And then related to calcium as well, Opal asked, how do birds know to get calcium? And can they tell what has calcium in it?
I would think they somehow have a way of doing that. Like, I won't always be there. My volunteers won't always be there providing eggshells. It is known that they'll take calcium-rich soil. They'll literally swallow in the soil for the calcium, and they'll eat snail shells too. And they will also eat grit for some species, so, and animal bones as well. So there must be a way that they know intuitively that this is calcium and I should eat it. Also, I saw a study where gulls were eating oysters during the breeding season, not because it made them more full than eating garbage, because they usually eat garbage, but the females will go and eat oysters specifically to get that calcium, and apparently oysters calcium is much more processable for the amount they eat compared to animal bones, the other gulls find in like the trash dumps.
That's really interesting. Patricia wants to know, are there specific designs for nesting boxes that you recommend for bluebirds?
I would say check out the Southern California Bluebird Club's website or the North American Bluebird Society's website or Nest Watch. They all have plans that are suitable for bluebirds and have the right dimensions so that like starlings and stuff won't get in.
Yeah, those are great resources for bluebird nest box designs. And then Yoni asked, should I put out eggshells for the bluebirds?
Yeah, you can, and other birds will probably take it as well if you're putting it in your backyard, for example. I'm not going to suggest you do that, I guess, but doing so probably won't harm them and it might be beneficial.
And probably making sure that they are also sterilized like what you did, right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, definitely make sure they're still sterilized because birds will get salmonella too, and it's just unsanitary.
Yeah, especially what we're seeing this year with salmonella outbreaks. Yeah. Elena asked, have you ever had an encounter with a bird like hand feeding?
Well, I have my own thing. Like, I don't really think hand feeding birds is necessarily a great idea. Well, I don't really know that much on the subject or research on that subject. But I don't really do that. I do like feed birds, like seed and stuff occasionally, but I don't hand feed them.
Yeah, that's probably the best course of action, right? Don't get them too acclimated to people where it could pose a danger to themselves and potentially to people too. So great. Let's see, what else? Oh, well, Mike chimed in about that bluebird eggshell color. And he says, as near as I can tell, the blue eggs have to do with camouflage. It could be blending them into the nest or the birds sitting on them. It could be left over from when they weren't cavity nesters, like the robin, that had blue to protect from the sun. So those are really interesting ideas for why there might be blue eggs with bluebirds. All right. Well, that is the last question I'm seeing for now. So, and I guess related to that too, someone just mentioned that there are some incidents of bluebirds having white eggs. And yeah, that has been documented. Did you happen to see any with your bluebirds?
No, I didn't see any, but I've heard of that and seen like reports published on that.
Yeah. And we had another question come in from Robin, who wondered if bluebirds fed eggshells to their young. And did you happen to observe them to see if they did that?
No, I wasn't able to observe to see if they did that. I hope that someone will do that study someday to see, maybe put a camera in there and just watch them 24/7, because since nestlings need so much calcium, just like egg laying, they're both processes that take a lot of calcium. Skeleton growth takes a lot of calcium, so I would think they would need more calcium other than what they're getting from their bugs, because in that same study showing that adults need the amount of calcium the adults need, they only get 5 to 10% of that calcium from their bugs. So I would think that the parents are also feeding something else to the nestlings.
Great. Yeah, thank you for all your great answers. You did a fantastic job. And Lara, I wanted to ask you, do you have any last things you want to share with everybody before we sign off?
I want to thank everybody for attending, and thank you to all my mentors that have supported me, as well as everybody else who's supported me in what I've been doing. Thank you.